Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. Uh, we do educational videos over here, and we tend to focus on great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, cosmologies, grand unified theories that you can hang your hat on, that you can use for every aspect of your life, but particularly um, your quest for better spiritual, mental, or physical health, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your uh, attempt to do some paradigm shifting. And today is our 65th video that we've done on the book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. And that is written by Dr. Daniel Ingram. And Ingram has spent a lot of time over in monasteries in the Far East, on the cushion, meditating many hours a day for long periods, and honing in the techniques that he's been taught by monks and other Buddhist luminaries, and he brings it back to us on a silver platter, written in English, and in all its geeky detail. We are in, I think this is chapter 38. We've been in this chapter for a while. So, and this is on, this is his revised four-path model. So as you, really he identifies two different kinds of meditation: insight meditation and concentration. Concentration meditation is just you're focusing on one object, and then insight meditation is you are opening up to your six sense doors, your five senses, and your mental impressions, and investigating those for the three characteristics of impermanence, dissatisfactoriness, and no self. So all of our sensations have the three characteristics of no self, dissatisfactoriness, and impermanence. And as we do that, our mind gets sharper, faster, more clear, and we go through cycles of stages of insight. And if we complete a cycle, it's kind of, we get to fruition, and then some kind of threshold is reached, and we have kind of a more wise person, I guess is what I would say. And so in this chapter, he's talking about he talked about the Theravada four-path model, the traditional Buddhist, one of the traditional Buddhist models, and this is just his version of a revised four-path model. So, you know, your first path is your first trip through the cycle, then your second path we call a stream enterer, and then now he's talking about the third path. So we are in the middle of the third path here. As those on third path cycle, they will enter new territory, possibly causing some uncertainty or instability. And with each review phase, they tend to feel that they truly have done it until they notice the limits of their practice. There can be this nagging sense in the background that things aren't finished. And yet figuring out exactly what the problem is can be very slippery. It is a bit like being in the stages just before stream entry, trying to figure out what exactly needs to be done. They need to notice something that has nothing to do with the cycles to untangle the knot of perception at its core. But doing this can be a real trick. It is a very strange place, as we seem to know the insight practice, related aspects of the Dharma all the way to the end, and yet somehow it still isn't quite enough. In that vein, it is interesting to note that I wrote most of this book while I was an anagami. I believe that's through the third path. And years later, I still appreciate much of what I wrote then. My emphases are slightly different now, but the basics are the same. As practice deepens, anagamis begin to tire of the cycles to a small or large degree and begin to look to something outside of or unrelated to them for the answer to the final question. Golden dreams, meaning golden chains, such as a luminous transcendent superspace or ground of being, can at once become more compellingly attractive and more repulsive. Finally, the cycles of insight and, if meditators have them, the shamatha jhanas, the powers, and all the other perks and prerogatives of their stages of awakening, as well as any concentration abilities, again, if they develop them, hold no appeal and only lead to more unsatisfying cycles. In fact, these cycles may strangely begin to become a source of deep existential disgust, and this can come as quite a surprise to those who previously felt enraptured by them. I completed around 27 full, complete insight cycles with powerful arising and passing events, challenging dark nights, equanimity phases, and what seemed to be brand new, fresh fruitions and review phases between third and fourth paths. There is nothing special about that number, both because it is just a rough guess and because of the reasons I stated when describing the phenomena of what Bill Hamilton referred to as 12th path. The later cycles got faster and faster, so that by the end, it seemed I was whipping one out every few weeks or even every few days, but they still seemed to be leading nowhere. It was only when I had gotten so sick of the cycles and realized that they were leading nowhere that I was able to see what has nothing to do with the cycles, which also wasn't anything except a strange untangling of the knot of perceiving them. The cycles, for better or worse, have continued just the same. Thus, there is not much point in counting cycles or paths, as they don't necessarily correlate well with anything beyond the first two or three. And issues of backsliding can really make things complex, as I explained earlier. Finishing up my revised fourth path model, Arahants, which I believe is through all four paths, Arahants have finally untangled the knot of perception, dissolved the sense of the center point as being the center point, and no longer experientially make a separate self out of the patterns of sensations that used to produce that sense, even though those same patterns of sensations continue. This is a different understanding from those of third path, and makes this path about something that is beyond the paths. This is also poetically called the opening of the wisdom eye, which, as mentioned, is not talking about any sort of additional eye or psychic eye or whatever, as some people seem to extrapolate from my mentioning it without this qualifier in the first edition. What is interesting is that I could write about this stage reasonably well when I was an anagami, but that is a whole different world from knowing it as an arahant. As an anagami, it seemed like about 95 to 99% of the field of experience knew itself where and as it was. The last little remaining ignorant percentage was maddeningly difficult to track down, with the tracking down paradigm obviously being part of the problem. That subtle few percent of the field of perception that was still poorly perceived and caused a surprising amount of discomfort that got worse rather than better as practice progressed. To use strictly metaphorical language, the wisdom eye may seem to blink initially, which is a way of saying that this untangling of the final knot of perception may retangle itself, though having ever seen perception truly untangled, that insight, even if transient, really points to the essence of realization, and even remembering what it was like can call the mind back to that far superior way of perceiving. We may go through cycles of suddenly untangling just after fruition, and then having that insight slowly fade over a few hours, at least on retreat, as each round of physical sensations, then mental sensations, then complex emotional formations, then lastly fundamental formations such as inquiry itself, move through and become integrated into this new correct and direct perception of reality as it is. Review cycles may recur many times during each period when perception is untangled, and during those periods, the cycles may seem rather irrelevant in comparison to keeping the level of clarity and acceptance high enough to keep the eye open. When the eye is in quotes there, when the direct and untangled perceptual mode fades and the kind of perception seems to retie itself, the familiar insight cycles may seem like pure drudgery as the focus drifts back to getting lost in the cycles and then gradually shifting again to getting clear enough to get the eye to open again. The themes that occupy center stage go through a cycle that is very much like a progress cycle. Finally, the various cycles all converge and the wisdom eye stays open from then on. The knot remains untied. Said another way, we cease to be able to perceive reality in a tangled state, and even everything that seemed tangled is now clearly perceived as intrinsically untangled without any other perceptual option. That being seen, nothing can erode or disturb the centerlessness of perspective. Done is what had to be done, and life goes on. That there are arahants who have flipped reality around to the centerless mode of perception, but had it retangle, and that there are those who have opened it and had it stay open is rarely mentioned but worth knowing. For the arahant who has kept the knot untangled, there is nothing more to be gained on the ultimate front from insight practices, as that axis of development has been taken as far as it goes. That said, insight practices can continue to be of great benefit to them for a whole host of reasons. There is much they can learn, just like everyone else, about everything there is to learn. They can grow, develop, change, evolve, mature, and participate in this strange, beautiful, comic, tragic, human drama just like everyone else. They can integrate these understandings and their unfolding implications into their general way of being. Practicing being mindful and the rest still helps, since the mind is an organic thing like a muscle, and how we condition it affects it profoundly. These practitioners also cycle through the stages of insight, as with everyone, beyond stream entry. So doing insight practices can move those cycles along. I commonly get questions about the fact that arahants still cycle, and thus must go through dark night stages. The dark night stages are not the problem that they were before, as they relied on the knot at the center of perception for much of their disturbing power. With the knot of perception gone, the stage's unfortunate aspects vanish, and the skillful aspects that engender growth keep us real and promote fascinating spiritual adventures remain. It is amazing to call up the stages of insight and go deeply into them while in this untangled perceptual mode and watch how they just don't stick as they did. Don't catch us in the same way, and yet still take us on a rich tour of ourselves in so many different human facets. This sort of formal review practice can yield rich treasures of development and amusement. Enjoy. On less fun topics, in the circles I run in, this first edition of this book inspired some folks to create a spin-off term, technical fourth path, which continues to be loosely defined in a strangely large number of ways by various definers, but generally was pointing to this disconnect between the standard Theravada models that implied eliminating all negative emotions and the perceptual models that involved seeing all things as naturally empty, centerless phenomena. Please note that various schools of thought on exactly what the criteria are for technical fourth path do not agree on those criteria, and claiming that someone has technical fourth path has become relatively common, for better or worse. If you run into someone claiming this attainment, it might be worth asking exactly what they mean and what their criteria are to avoid confusion and needless projection. One criterion that gets thrown around as primary for this technical fourth path is the sense that a person is simply done. Over the years, I have had that feeling myself many times, and I have come to the measured conclusion that we have to be very careful with what we do with that feeling of being done, as it can very easily become a subtle or gross and intractable delusion, something we cling to that prevents us from carefully seeing what is happening now, like a refusal not to progress, grow, and improve. And it can keep us from knowing what the limits of our practice might be and how much more progress could occur if we had more what Carol Dweck calls a growth versus fixed mindset. Thus, should you find yourself feeling done, just watch how that unfolds over time and varies by the moment, as well as how that feeling responds to the challenges that life can bring. Keep an open mind, as I think this attitude will likely help you more than being certain that the feeling of doneness will last forever or be something you can ride on. I also advocate that whenever that feeling of being done arises, you recognize it and make a conscious resolution to open to anything beyond it, just in case, as such resolutions have real power in this territory. I was blessed enough to be sitting at a lunch table with some of the grandmothers of the grandfathers of the modern Western meditation teacher world one day, a truly accomplished and seasoned group of wisdom beings. And they all agreed that whatever you think you have achieved, you should always keep practicing. There are so many axes of development that further practice can benefit. Further, if you are really done in the insight sense, no amount of inquiry can violate that. So inquire your ass off, just to be on the safe side, as it can do no harm and can do much good. Since the term technical fourth path is out there, were I to define technical fourth path, I would define it as having all the following attributes, and there are 7. 1. the total and final elimination of any sense that there is anything called attention or awareness that is different from, separate from, or unrelated to bare phenomena. 2. The perfect direct comprehension of all sensations in the entire field where and as they are by themselves, as perception and the sensations are the same thing. So the parity between perception and reality is perfectly one-to-one at all times, meaning that the question of parity is actually completely eliminated perceptually, as there are just sensations. 3. The total naturalness of the field, such that everything is obviously happening completely on its own in a perfectly causal way. 4. The total integration of all sense doors into one unified and all-pervading sense door, as mentioned in the time and space model section, meaning that all sensations appear to be just qualities of this perfectly integrated boundaryless, fluxing, created on the fly volume, which also specifically means that all thoughts are perceived naturally as part of this same integrated fluxing volume. 5. The direct and immediate perception that time and space are created out of the sensations that arise and vanish now, such that the sense of time and space as existing real entities is entirely seen through. 6. All sensate phenomena, without exception, self-liberate automatically, meaning that the experience of such questions as, is this field awake, yields a wonderfully direct and satisfying experience of centerlessness and directness of the whole interdependent moment of that same question. 7. Any sense of a this and that is fundamentally completely uprooted at the perceptual level, and that this holds up over the long haul, meaning off retreat and for years in the face of the strongest vicissitudes of life, across insight cycles, across jhanas, and other shifts, and is the only and default perceptual mode at all times when there are any sensations of any kind occurring. Okay, back to the normal text. By having this sort of take on what awakening is about, which I think is a pretty high standard, I have been accused of having very low standards. I think this standard is a very reasonable one, and if you think it is a low bar, then I would recommend attaining it and seeing how you find it, and wish you well on your journey beyond it to whatever else calls to you at that point. If you have already attained it and it has held up for a while, drop me a line if you feel inclined, as it would be fun to talk about it. So now that we have talked about the Theravada path models, we should give some time to the related Indian Mahayana models. So this section is called the Bodhisattva Bhumi model. Bhumi is B-H-U-M-I. One of the models of Indian Buddhism propagated by the Tibetan tradition is called the Bodhisattva Bhumis. The word Bhumi means stage or ground in the sense of level of attainment. It is a model of progressive stages of awakening that gets very different emphases depending on the author. I actually like a few aspects of the Bhumi model, such as the idea of directly realizing shunyata or emptiness and deeply integrating that into our perception, paradigm, practice, ethical conduct, and personality. It is a model that addresses many axes of development simultaneously. The details of the Bhumi model can be found in various Mahayana texts, such as the large sutra on perfect wisdom, Asanga's Bodhisattva Bhumi, the jewel ornament of liberation by Gampopa, and many others. Chogyam Trungpa gives a nice description of it in the Myth of Freedom and the Way of Meditation. I tend to think of the standard number of bhumis as being 10. However, some texts and traditions also list other numbers of bhumis, but I will stick to the way of counting that involves 10 bhumis for the sake of simplification. I do not consider myself an expert in this model. It is a very complex one that ascribes a wide range of exceedingly high and complex criteria involving emotions, paradigms, concentration abilities, perceptions, psychic powers, specifically the ability at each level to create multiple emanations that increase exponentially with each bhumi, and a whole host of other aspects to practitioners at each stage. It is also heavy on metaphors that some unfortunately take literally. We could take the general point that there are many, many subtle levels of development and a vast range of abilities, experiences, talents, qualities, personality traits, and skills that can be developed to profound degrees by dedicated practitioners. Or we could just go off into crazy land by reading those models literally. If you check them out, hopefully you will immediately see the problems and the beautiful message to have high standards and be developed broadly. The most common form of crazy land that otherwise mature adults tend to jump into with the bhumis reminds me of the old comic book debates I had when I was about 8 years old, such as who would win in a fight between Wonder Woman and Batman. The Buddhist version of this is when grown humans basically debate who would win in spiritual combat, such as between an arhat like Sariputta and a bodhisattva or whatever bhumi. Obviously, if the bhumi descriptions are accurate, best to bet your money on the bodhisattva, even a first-degree bhumi belt fighter can shake 100 world systems, not to mention manifest 100 bodies with 100 attendants to each body, and the numbers go up exponentially from there with higher bhumis. Yay, mythical dharma combat. Seriously, I have heard serious conversations between Buddhist practitioners with doctoral degrees that were that weird and weirder. Not only are the metaphors of the abilities of practitioners at each bhumi of the grandest variety, the bhumi models are fraught with other problems as they assume simultaneous, synchronized development on numerous largely unrelated developmental axes. I consider such notions a bit naive, and the bhumi models are among the most complex and intricate of all the package models. However, like most of the teachings, they contain some very interesting points made in what I consider language that can be alienating and confusing to an untrained reader of this material. Thus, I recommend you check out the bhumi models, particularly if you want to understand Tibetan texts or do practices in that tradition. And unlike me, you should probably study it with an expert rather than assume that your practices in one tradition qualify you to a critique of someone else's tradition, a lesson I clearly have failed to learn even through long years of repeated error. One of the more common pastimes of us mappers is to try to correlate attainments across traditions and maps. This is seriously problematic, if often fascinating. It is not that useful thoughts, conversations, and insights, conversations, and thoughts can't arise from this sort of work, as they can. However, resolving the tensions between models and across Buddhist vehicles that rely on such totally different underlying paradigms and practices can lead to lots of bizarre and sometimes unhelpful conclusions. Ignoring the complexities and speaking just in terms of fundamental levels of realization, which is already a very, very narrow filter, I am very comfortable associating with the first bhumi with stream entry. Second path is very hard to line up with any bhumi, but it is tempting to put it in the early bhumis just on general principles. At points, I have lined up anagamihood with anywhere from the 4th to the 7th bhumi, and arahantship with anywhere from the 6th to 10th bhumi. My favorite correlation for arahantship is the 8th bhumi, at least in terms of underlying perceptual realization and ignoring the remaining elaborate criteria. My perennially patient and wise anonymous editor informs me that to get these correlations right, we would also have to have cultivated the unique causes provided through training in the practices of bodhisattva yana. The 10 perfections, often the first 6 are more widely known. The criteria with which I am moderately unfamiliar. My editor also reminds me that my correlations lack nuance and perhaps are misguided, and this is probably correct. However, I clearly don't have the sense to entirely heed my editor's sage advice. Associations of paths and bhumis are not perfect correlations, and if you spend some time reading about the model, you will see why. I recommend that you check out the sources listed above if you are interested in further information about the bhumis, and hopefully through good practice you could come to your own conclusions. Okay, I think we're going to stop there for now. This is pretty arcane material here, and I may look into, well, there's only another half page of this, and then he gets into the Mahayana 5-path model. So I guess we'll probably stick it out tomorrow, start from here and head on. So thanks for tuning in today, and have a